Sisters and brothers, we have one more reading to add to our collection this morning. It is taken from the Gospel according to Bobby McFerrin, chapter 10, beginning to read from the 11th verse. Here's a little song I wrote. You might like to sing it note for note. Don't worry. Be happy. In every life we have some trouble. When you worry, you make it double. Don't worry. Be happy. Ain't got no place to lay your head. Somebody came and took your bed. Don't worry. Be happy. The landlord say your rent is late. He might have to relitigate. Oh. Be happy. The Gospel according to Bobby McFerrin. It was proclaimed to the world for the very first time in 1988. And it connected with people, it really did. It became the very top of the Billboard tunes. To this very day, it still remains one of the most famous one-hit wonders of all time. Everyone picked up on that song. Why, that year, the country of Jamaica even made that song, Don't Worry, Be Happy, a kind of an unofficial national anthem. And it wasn't just because it was a great song with a lovely reggae beat to it that picked up on those Caribbean music traditions. But it was particularly because that year, 1988, was the year that Hurricane Gilbert hit the country of Jamaica, devastated it. And for some strange reason, which maybe we'll try to understand here today, the Jamaicans just found it so fitting to be able to sing, Don't Worry, Be Happy, from amidst the rubble of their destroyed country. Not everyone loved Bobby McFerrin's song. Some people hated it. In particular, I think some people who really struggle with worry, who really struggle with anxiety, had a hard time with it. Because it just seemed a little bit too simple, a little bit too silly. Because when you are caught up in endless cycles of worry and anxiety, sometimes the very last thing you need to hear is somebody who comes along and says, Don't worry, be happy. Because when you get caught in that cycle, it's not really a choice. You can't just choose to stop worrying. It is a compulsion. And so if somebody comes along and suggests that it is as simple as that, don't worry, everything will be fine. Some people will just react by getting upset, by getting mad, by getting down on themselves for their own failure, and it only makes their anxieties worse. And this is something we need to realize and take to heart because, you see, Bobby McFerrin was not the only one to preach the gospel of don't worry. Somebody else from Nazareth named Jesus preached very much the same message. As you look at what he said and what he did and how he lived, you begin to realize that this basic message, don't worry, was central to just about everything that he did. In fact, Jesus even had his own version of the Don't Worry, Be Happy song. It went like this. Therefore I tell you, he said, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? And if you were to just look at that key sermon of Jesus, you might walk away with the idea that Jesus was really saying no more than Bobby McFerrin. Because it says it over and over again. Don't worry, don't worry. And if you're somebody who struggles with anxiety, you might not necessarily see in those words of Jesus much that would help you let go of your worry. He doesn't tell you how. I mean, apart from telling you to look around and to consider the natural world, to look at the lilies of the field and the birds of the air. And that might be a nice thing to do. But how is it really supposed to help you to stop worrying? But you see, in this, as in most things, Jesus' actions spoke louder than his words. And you need to understand how he lived to understand how these words apply to your life. And this morning we got a little insight into that. We read the story about how Jesus sent his disciples out to the towns and the villages of Galilee to preach the gospel, to heal the sick, to cast out demons and help people. And I know that we often read this story as a kind of a one-time thing. You know, on this one occasion, for a very limited time, Jesus sent his disciples out on this mission. But actually, a lot of evidence has come to light that really indicates that this was not just a one-time thing for Jesus and his disciples. That this was, in fact, how they lived and how they carried out their ministry almost all the time. It was a lifestyle. And not only that, there's a lot of evidence that indicates that this was exactly how Jesus' disciples continued to live, even after he had left them for quite some time. So Jesus is here proclaiming not a one-time thing, but a lifestyle. And it is a strange lifestyle. A wandering lifestyle, moving from one place to another, not staying any place for any length of time. This was how Jesus lived. Remember what he said to one prospective disciple. He said, "Foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." This was Jesus' lifestyle. Wandering around, homeless, and ruthless. And as they were to go, as they went, they preached the good news, they healed the sick, they did all kinds of good things in the towns and villages that they visited. Almost all the time, this is how they lived. But the really amazing thing is how Jesus wants them to travel. How he wants them to move. And it's not what they are to take with them, but rather what they are to leave behind. And Jesus' instructions are quite explicit. He says to them, "Take no gold or silver or copper, no bag for your journey, or 2 tunics, or sandals, or a staff." And you need to understand that all of these things that he lists here are the very things that people in that world took with them on any journey. And why did they take these things? So that they might be ready to deal with whatever came along. Whatever problems, whatever difficulties, they had the resources to take care of themselves. And yet Jesus says to his disciples, he specifically prohibits them from taking these very things with them. And it's at this point that we begin to realize just how far Jesus is off from how we think in this world. Because when you are out traveling, when you're going somewhere, I'm going to the United States this coming week, tomorrow. And when you go, what are the things that make you not worry as you travel in some strange place? The things you take with you. Your wallet, your credit card, your passport, your health insurance. I mean, who among us would dare to travel in the United States without some health insurance? Your suitcase full of clothes. And the one thing that makes you worry when you're traveling in some strange place is to suddenly find yourself without all of those things. That's what makes you worry. And yet Jesus is turning all of that upside down, and he's saying that his disciples should go out without all of this stuff, and that the very lack of these things is what will banish worry for them. What Jesus is doing effectively is he's taking the basic assumptions of this world and overturning them. See, the basic assumption that we work with, the one that we live with day by day by day, is this: the more you have, the less you worry. The more you have, the less you worry. We think this way all the time. How often have you said to yourself, how often have you thought to yourself, oh, if only I had a little bit more money, I wouldn't have to worry about this, or I wouldn't have to worry about that. How often have you said to yourself, oh, if only I had a whole lot more money, I wouldn't have to worry about anything. Now, on some level, I think we do all recognize that it doesn't quite work like that. That the people who have the most actually don't worry the least. I mean, you just have to listen to the extremely wealthy and how they talk about their worries, their anxieties, to realize that it doesn't quite work out like that. And you know what? Perhaps that example of Jamaica, and how the Jamaicans learned not to worry at that very moment when Hurricane Gilbert had taken everything away from them, also illustrates to us that it doesn't quite work like that. So on some level, maybe we realize it doesn't quite work, but still that basic assumption keeps going through our minds. The more you have, the less you worry. And we tend to look at the world like that. Jesus is taking that basic assumption of life and turning it upside down. And he's saying to his disciples that the real reason to worry is to be found in something else, not in what you have with you. And this is what he says. He says to them, ask and it will be given you. Search and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you. Now, this is another saying of Jesus that we misunderstand all the time. Because, of course, we look at it, we hear it, with that basic assumption in our minds. The assumption that the more you have, the less you worry. And when you hear those words, ask and it will be given you, with that mindset, you know what you're going to ask for? You're going to ask for everything. Because that's what you think you need in order to not worry. You'll ask for $1 million or more. And Jesus is here not promising that you're going to get $1 million. Because you need to remember that Jesus was saying this to people that he was sending out with nothing. That he was teaching not to worry when they had nothing. So what then was the reason not to worry? Not because of what they had, but because of this. He said to them, is there anyone among you who, if your child asks for bread, will give a stone? Or if the child asks for fish, will give a snake? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good things to those who ask him? What Jesus is saying here is this. It all comes down to how you see God. And if you see God in one way, in the wrong way, you will worry. But if you see God in the right way, you won't. If you see God as that being who's out to get you, you know, that great judge looking down from heaven, just waiting for you to do something wrong so that he can punish you. That God who will never forget that one thing you did all those years ago that was wrong, and has just been waiting for that opportunity to punish you for it. If that's how you see God, of course you're going to worry. You'd have every reason to worry. That's why some people say the universe is out to get me. It's that, mind you, that God is that capricious God who's out to punish you, to find something wrong that you've done, and make you suffer for it. And that's why it was so important to Jesus to teach his disciples a completely different way to see God. To see God instead as that loving Father who knew how to give good things to his children. He knew that if only they would come to see God that way, there would be no reason to worry. Now, it's important to stress here that when Jesus said this to disciples he was sending out with nothing to the towns and villages of Galilee, he was not promising them that they would never go to sleep hungry. He was not promising them that they would never have to bed down without proper shelter. Of course, these things happened on the road. But he was telling them that as they went with this trust and confidence in God, God would not let them down. God would give them what they needed most when they needed it most. And that's what they would learn. So the bottom line is this. If you want to get rid of that anxiety, that worry that plagues your life, you need to get a different idea of God, a different image of God. You need to learn to see God as God truly is. But you know what? That's tough. It's not easy to let go of all of these ways that we've been accustomed to look at life, to look at the universe, to look at our God. And so sometimes we need something radical to make that view of God change. That's what Jesus was trying to accomplish. He was sending his disciples out with nothing. Why? So that when they were out there in the middle of nowhere, they wouldn't have any choice. They would have to trust God. And when they trusted God, Jesus knew that God would come through. And so they would begin to learn to see God, and their faith would grow. Also, very importantly, he told them that as they went, they were to stop and look around at the world around them, and to consider the lilies of the field, and to consider the birds of the air. Because by considering the creation, they would have a better understanding of the Creator. They would see that God, the God who took care of the birds and the flowers, was that loving Father who could also take care of them. It was all about changing their view of God. And we need to learn the same thing. Does that mean, am I suggesting that what we need to do therefore is to give away all of our possessions and start wandering around from place to place, never settling down long in one place? Is that what we need to do? No, I'm not saying that's what we need to do. You can relax. Though, if you've ever had that experience in your life, you will know that you learn a great deal about trusting God through that kind of experience. But you see, that sending them out with nothing was just Jesus' method of getting that key lesson about who God was and how he would take care of his people across. It was his way of getting it through the disciples' thick skulls. And what's important is the lesson, not the method. You need to find some way to let that lesson through your thick skull. That God is maybe not how you've imagined him to be. You need to let go of your trust in the things that you have or the things you need to have. And learn to place your trust in something else, in someone else. In that is the beginning of the end of anxiety. And that is the beginning of true faith. Let us consider that.